Deep within the forgotten pages of North American folklore, buried under layers of sanitized history and academic discomfort, lies a narrative so strange, so persistently whispered, and so stubbornly recurring across different cultures that it refuses to die. The story of the so-called giant skeletons once said to have been found across the continent. Tonight, you are about to step into a vast labyrinth of old newspaper archives, archaeological oddities, tribal legends, and contradictory reports that have left researchers puzzled for more than a century. And although nothing here should be taken as confirmed historical fact, the repeating patterns raise questions too intriguing to ignore. In the early 1800s, as European settlers expanded westward, newspapers began publishing accounts describing unusually large skeletal remains reportedly uncovered in mounds and burial sites. These accounts, in many cases, were attributed to local farmers, town officials, or amateur excavators who lacked any reason to fabricate such discoveries. These stories, scattered across states like Ohio, Wisconsin, Tennessee, West Virginia, and even New York, often describe skeletons measuring between 7 and 10 feet tall, sometimes more. These figures greatly exceeded the typical stature of humans in the region at the time. Yet despite their abundance in newspapers, many of these accounts never progressed into formal archaeological study, often ending abruptly after the initial report. Equally puzzling is that during the same era, the Smithsonian Institution was frequently mentioned in connection with many of these finds, but not because the organization confirmed any such remains existed. Instead, newspapers often claimed the skeletons were taken away for study and subsequently lost, misplaced, or reclassified. It is crucial to stress that the Smithsonian has repeatedly denied these claims, firmly stating that no such remains have ever been held in their collections. This means the mystery deepens not through confirmed evidence, but through the absence of clarity. What were these papers reporting, and why did the trail always seem to go cold? What makes the subject even more intriguing are the oral histories of numerous indigenous nations. These are stories that long predate European contact and that describe encounters with unusually tall beings, sometimes portrayed as powerful, sometimes as hostile, and sometimes as builders of the very mounds settlers later excavated. The Cherokee spoke of the moon-eyed people, described as pale and tall. The Paiute told of the Setaka, a race of red-haired giants. And the Ho-Chunk recounted battles with towering enemies said to possess exceptional strength. While these stories belong to the realm of myth and should never be interpreted as literal historical accounts, their consistency across distant cultures raises a question. Could they encode symbolic memories of real ancient conflicts, exaggerated over generations? Or do they serve purposes completely unrelated to archaeology, like spiritual teachings, cosmic cycles, or tribal identity? Still, the most captivating part of the mystery lies not in the legends themselves, but in their convergence with the mound-building cultures whose earthworks still dot the American landscape. The Adena and Hopewell cultures, who flourished long before modern records began, constructed massive burial mounds, ceremonial complexes, and geometric earthworks so precise that some aligned perfectly with celestial events. Yet very little is known about the full scope of their societies. Early 19th century excavation journals sometimes mentioned unusually tall individuals among their burials, though again, such notes cannot be treated as verified anthropology. By the late 1800s, a surge of amateur excavations, many documented only in local papers, reported skeletons with unusually thick femurs, massive skulls, or strange bone proportions, raising curiosity even among skeptics. But without proper preservation, re-examination, or peer review, such finds evaporated into the fog of time, leaving behind only fragmented references. Some researchers argue that the techniques of the era, which lacked modern osteology standards, may have led to misinterpretations. For example, large bones of prehistoric animals mistaken for humans, natural deformities exaggerated into sensational stories, or simple measurement errors printed without verification. Others suggest that the cultural fascination with biblical giants or legendary heroes may have encouraged reporters to embellish or dramatize discoveries, blending fact with excitement. Yet, even when accounting for every possible exaggeration, hoax, or misidentification, the sheer number of independent reports leaves a lingering sense that something unusual may have been encountered, even if its true nature is lost behind unreliable documentation. Meanwhile, another thread of the mystery points to early American academic institutions that were attempting to build a unified narrative of national prehistory. Some historians suggest that stories implying pre-Native American civilizations, especially those involving non-standard human remains, may have been dismissed or ignored because they contradicted the emerging cultural consensus about ancient America. Whether this was intentional, accidental, or simply the result of limited evidence is impossible to know. What is clear is that historical narratives are often shaped by the documentation that survives, not necessarily by the full complexity of the past. Yet the strangest aspect of all may be the recurring claim that giant skeletons were taken away, usually without follow-up. This assertion appears so frequently in old newspapers that it has become a cornerstone of the legend, though its repetition alone cannot confirm any factual basis. It is possible that artifacts were indeed removed not because they were extraordinary, but because institutions routinely collected excavated materials as part of broader research efforts. Still, the vanishing context fuels suspicion among enthusiasts who wonder whether something significant was overlooked or lost. Another rarely discussed dimension is the cultural transition occurring at the time. Early America was obsessed with the exotic, the mysterious, the supernatural, and the biblical. Newspapers were competitive, sensational stories sold well, and many rural towns trusted the testimony of local citizens more than distant authorities. This environment created the perfect storm for legends to flourish. But it also means the line between genuine anomalies and creative storytelling became almost impossible to separate. Modern forensic anthropology, which relies on rigorous documentation, cannot validate these old accounts without physical remains. But it also cannot fully dismiss them without addressing the breadth of historical references that continue to resurface. Today, the legend of the giant skeletons remains suspended between folklore and forgotten history. A puzzle with missing pieces and too many conflicting claims to resolve. Skeptics argue that the absence of physical evidence ends the discussion. Believers argue that the absence is itself suspicious. Academics seek documented proof. Enthusiasts see patterns in the undocumented. The truth, whatever it may be, is trapped behind a century of lost artifacts, inconsistent records, and stories that stretch from one side of the continent to the other. But perhaps the most important question is not whether giants existed, but why the legend has persisted so strongly, and why so many cultures felt compelled to describe beings far larger and stronger than themselves. Maybe the stories reflect symbolic battles between tribes, or metaphors for societal change, or mythological echoes of ancient humans who appeared extraordinary to small communities. Or perhaps they hint at something that once stood on the edges of memory, now distorted by time. In the end, the mystery of the giant skeletons of North America remains unresolved not because it points to a secret history, but because it sits in the space where archaeology, folklore, and human imagination intersect. And as long as unanswered questions linger in old journals and forgotten mounds, the legend will continue to evoke the same unsettling curiosity. If the past held surprises we no longer understand, how many pieces of our story are still missing? And why were they erased from the record? Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the unknown as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more explorations into the world's greatest mysteries.